Welcome back to Mixed Up. I'm Emma.
And I'm Nicole.
And today we're recording in a caravan. Not just any caravan, the beautiful Club Jupiter.
And we're here to discuss Disobedient Bodies, the new book by author, academic, and broadcaster Emma Dabiri.
While I resent my value being determined solely by the way I look, I've confessed my love of glamour. And there are days when attending to my body, to my skin, my hair, my clothing, wearing jewelry and luxuriating in perfumes, body oils and creams is simply what I want to do. These are all ways to connect with, care for, and enjoy the experience of embodiment. Many of these practices feel intimately linked to a sense of self-care. And while this quote of Audre Lorde has been commodified almost to the point of cliche, the truth of it remains. Caring for myself is not self-indulgence. It is self-preservation, and that is an act of political warfare. There's an urgency to my desire for a more holistic approach. The alienation and pronounced disconnection we experience in regards to our bodies leaves us vulnerable to predatory forces that seek to manipulate us in order to better exploit us. The operating logic of capitalism encourages individualism and competition. And nowhere is this more pronounced than in our beauty culture. We need to reclaim beauty and expand it beyond the boundaries of judgment and comparison that our hypervisual capitalist model encourages and uses to control us. We are under siege from a disciplinary regime that distorts what should be a source of pleasure and inspiration into something painful, punitive, and exclusive. Something as ordinary as being desired has been reimagined as the preserve only of those physically perfect enough to deserve it. For most, beauty becomes something beyond reach that can only, if ever, be accessed by submitting to regulatory procedures. We need to come to a kinder, more expansive relationship with ourselves, each other, and our bodies. More compassion directed inwards radiates outwards. This is no small feat in our often cruel, hugely competitive, image-saturated world, a fact which makes this act of reimagining all the more critical. I'll stop there.
So I felt like I needed to clap or something.
I appreciate it.
I guess I just wanted to start off with kind of, why beauty, why this book and why now? I think off the back of 2020, we obviously saw there was this huge surge in particularly publishing and this idea of, we want to hear from Black voices and we want to hear about Black voices hear from Black voices about race. And obviously we know you from your incredible books like Don't Touch My Hair and What White People Can Do Next. Do you feel like this is something people expected you to go into beauty and beauty standards as kind of your next foray?
Yeah, I have no idea what people's expectations are. Who knows? But I don't think it's something that is entirely unexpected. So my PhD, which is looking at mixedness, has a chapter on beauty, and even though the PhD remains unfinished, that chapter was something I started in maybe 2015 or 2016. Right. So this is something that I've been, even if that's like not public facing work, it's something that I've been doing research on and thinking about a great deal. And then I also, I think if you follow me on social media, you'll probably see that I have an interest in glamorous things. And I also am a contributing editor for Elle, and I write and so I write about beauty products in that capacity as well. And I've also presented I presented one TV series that was on art history. So I think there's also I have an interest in aesthetics as well. So I don't think it's completely out of the blue. Yeah. And then with Don't Touch My Hair, actually some of the ideas in here are things that I touched on in Don't Touch My Hair and then wanted to expand on by specifically looking at beauty, because maybe they're things that I just kind of touch on more in that first book. But also even if it was unexpected, like I'd be into that as well, because I don't want to be like pigeonholed. You know?
Of course. Yeah, exactly.
I think we'll get into that though, because it's like, why is that even a question that is unexpected? And like, what is the kind of conventional contradiction that we feel around like glamour and beauty? And to be honest, intelligent thought. But we're gonna
I feel like that's coming down the line, that question. But yeah, for sure.
Yeah. I wanted to kick off with talking about the history of beauty a little bit. So I love this book so much, and I love the way you structured it. And I felt like there was so much that was kind of in my mind somewhere, but like wasn't really right at the front of my mind, or that I hadn't kind of realized in some way. And so when you were talking to us about kind of Western beauty convention, and, you know, like the links between like ideas of witches and, you know, control and power and patriarchy and capitalism, and how that's unfolded in history and kind of been used to wield against us as women, and how interlinked that is with beauty. I just had so many like aha moments. But I was also kind of like, I should have pieced this all together. But could you give us a little bit of just for the benefit of our audience, a bit of a potted history, or like a bit of context on the history of like kind of the construct of beauty in the Western world?
Yeah, sure. And before I do that, I'll just give a little bit of context in regards to like what you were just saying and my work. So I feel like whatever subject I'm looking at, like whatever the topic is across a disparate or a broad range of subjects, the connective tissue that will connect the books together and that will be present in all of them, irrespective of what the topic is, will be like an analysis of power, and a analysis of capitalism, and because that underpins everything. That underpins everything, and I think it's so important that that is understood. So I think that's why. Well, I'm often talking about subjects that people don't necessarily expect that analysis of capitalism to be part of, but it's part of everything. And without really understanding its machinations, we'll never really understand the kind of like oppressive forces that determine our reality, because capitalism is often explained as an economic system, which it is, but it's so much more than an economic system. It also determines like the entirety of our social relations and how we behave to each other and how our societies are organized. And so one of the things that I talk about in Disobedient Bodies is this idea that and to think about like Western beauty standards as well. And I would also say Western beauty standards now are maybe what beauty standards isn't the right phrase,
it's more like the construct rather than the standard.
Exactly.
That was like really poignant for me, and like because of my work, obviously I'm really aware of how capitalism feeds into everything. So that's why I was like, why have I not pieced this all together in this way, like in the front of my mind? But it was just, I just love the way you structured it. Anyway, sorry to
no thank and I'm glad you made that distinction, because there might be different standards in different parts of the world, but our idea of what constitutes beauty, that it's like something that is primarily visual, physical, and essentially kind of superficial, has its antecedents or has its origins in like Western ideas of what constitutes beauty. So you might go to a different part of the world where the standard is different, but the idea of how beauty is measured and assessed still has its origins in kind of like Western discourse that's now been like, you know, like kind of promoted and imposed and imposed all over the world. I think one of the things that was like a very like eureka moment for me was not it's in the book, but I didn't discover it in researching this book, I think I first kind of came across the concept when I was teaching. So I taught African studies and SOAS for like over a decade. And I think it was in the process of like researching that I came across this idea that like amongst amongst the Yoruba, which is like my dad's ethnic group in Nigeria, but also like there's lots of Yoruba people like in England and in America from recent diasporas and kind of older diasporas as well. But was this idea that and this is not to say this is the context of Nigeria today, but in kind of like a pre-colonial understanding of things, or in traditional kind of philosophies or traditional metaphysics, was this idea that beauty was something that was, okay, this goes back to like senses. Okay, hang on, let me jump around a little bit again. So, okay, I'll start at the West. So this idea in the West of ocular centricism, which is the privileging of sight as like the primary sense. So I didn't understand that was something that was culturally specific. We're taught that like that's just the way we understand the world. You know, this idea that we can look at something and have knowledge of it from its appearance. We can make an assessment. We can make a value judgment about it from its appearance. But that comes from a specific tradition. We have many senses, and sight being seen as like the noblest sense is something that is a norm of like Western discourse. And there are many examples of like other cultures that didn't necessarily hold up sight as the primary sense with which to make sense of the world. And so with the Yoruba, and there's like a lot written on this, there was like an emphasis on the importance of like other senses, and there was less of an understanding that you could look at something and make a value judgment based solely on its appearance. So I was really fascinated by the impact that has on what kind of beauty culture emerges. And there's an idea that like the iwa, which is like your which is like inner beauty. So I guess essentially like your essence is something that is more powerful and relevant than your character, more so than the shell, which like kind of embodies that. And that's something that you that I talk about like a couple of different cultures where this was normal. And, you know, we're kind of told in this part of the world, oh, it's what's inside that counts, but it's quite superficial. That isn't really what determines. Maybe we have some sense that that's what we should aspire to. Exactly. But it doesn't really play out like that. So I was fascinated in cultures where there was actually like a stronger sense of that being important.
Yeah.
I've always felt deeply that I really related to this. I've always felt deeply that as soon as I know that somebody's character is ugly, I can't actually visually see them anymore as attractive. And I was like, I've just always deeply felt that. And so I was just like, yeah, this is...
Yeah. And there's lots of proverbs about that in Yoruba as well.
That's really, really interesting. I also feel like, you know, our character, quote unquote, as women can be really swept up into how nice we are. And like, and our goodness is wrapped up in something else entirely, rather than, again, like, because I know what you mean by when you say if you can't respect someone's character, or if you find their character to be ugly, obviously we can all have different meanings about that. But I feel like something that I've come across many times in my life is trying to be seen as a nice person, or doing good in a way that makes other people like me. So
we're now gonna be getting like we're now getting into the intersection.
Exactly.
Getting into like,
I was like, we've gone in a different direction, but it just made me think of I don't know, it just made me think of that in a way that I didn't expect. Again, this kind of this inner the inner beauty, the your character. I can see that almost getting manipulated in a way that makes you feel like, oh, if I'm not doing this, or I should be acting in this way, in this very specific way that makes, again, your character look or feel a certain way to people. I
But
don't
that's
know,
also
present
not,
in a different
that's
way.
not that's not somebody's true essence, though, is
Right,
it? That's
yeah,
them trying to like
exactly.
conform
Trying
to
to
like probably quite a
be
reductive type of
something.
femininity.
Yeah, exactly.
But not just that, like, I feel like now we're starting to talk about race. Like, I definitely feel like we're getting into that.
Probably,
Which I guess
yeah.
brings me to my next question,
Yeah.
because
Could I just add something before?
yeah.
But,
Yes, of
but I don't want
course.
to. I don't want to get in the flow of that question. But it was
Yeah.
just like based on what we were talking about before about
Sure.
like hang on. I just wanted to expand. Sorry, a little bit about this idea in some of the cultures as well, where the goal wasn't towards, we're very oriented towards like perfection and like physical achieving and this constant pursuit of like improvement, which again has its origins in capitalism. But cultures where like physical perfection was actually held in like slight suspicion, and so the goal was towards balance and harmony rather than perfection. So I just wanted to add that in.
Love that. No, that's
Yeah.
that's comforting.
Right. So I guess the question that's sparked by the beginnings of that, I think also because I know you so well, I'm like, this is about race. Like. But so one of the things that really resonated with me was when you were talking about pretty privilege, and you talked about Harriet Jacobs, and I think the book, which is called The Life of a Slave.
Incidents in the life of a slave girl.
In the life of a slave girl. And, obviously she is relentlessly pursued in a predatory sexual manner by her master.
When she's a child.
When she's a child. And, it's just this horrific kind of scenario where she decides that, like, she'd prefer to live in a crawl space and almost go lame. And, you describe this to us in the book. And it's this idea that two things. Beauty is an absolute curse in this instance. And also it's not safe to be perceived as beautiful. And I thought those things really struck me because of the work that we're doing as well on our book, and like looking into the tragic mulatto, and so many people we've spoken to, and older women we've spoken to who cannot relate to like today's idea that like if you're mixed and you're light, you are beautiful and you will be seen as beautiful. And, that is a privilege. We've spoken to a woman on our podcast who very much like felt that the way that she was perceived as Black in Ireland, and, throughout her life, basically beauty, sex, control, power, all these things you mentioned were basically a curse for her. And, privilege is just not a word that could ever be brought into this mix. And so I thought, like, it really struck me, you were talking about how we use this phrase pretty privilege now. And it's like, for me, it feels, I've always been uncomfortable with it because I feel like it's bandied about in a way that is like ahistorical.
Never that. Not on the internet.
Right. And also just like without consideration of things being conditional.
Conditional,
conditional
exactly.
and contextual.
Easily taken from you.
So I guess like, my question is about how important it is that we like, dig into this stuff that before we can kind of heal ourselves and move forward. It feels like there's a huge job to do, in this space. And it's really hard to know like where we start. But for me, I was like, surely we first have to tackle this kind of idea that, we have to look at this like conditionally and contextually before we can move forward.
Like that should be the basic criteria for talking about anything. But I think we live in a historical moment where I just find a lot of discourse, even though there's a wider expansion of the topics we're talking about, there are very predetermined ways that you are allowed to talk about them. There's a script that you must follow, and any deviation from that script runs the risk of being deemed, well, we live in a censorious time. There's a lot of like censorship. So it's actually quite difficult to have good faith, robust discourse, because there are such narrow parameters within which we're allowed talk about so many things. So it really actually shuts down.
Lots of caveating.
Lots of caveats.
Yeah, and you can't really, it's difficult to kind of like grapple with the complexity, not just the complexity, but even just like the truth of things, because they're
even just being honest. About your own experiences, or even how you feel about something. You run the risk of
being ostracized, being labeled as, you know, someone who just does not understand, who's unintelligent. Even when talking about your own experiences, I think, like, you know, we had a guest on, and she one of the first things she said to us is like, I've never had an outlet to speak, because now people say that like my pain that I've experienced in my life is beige tears, like crying beige tears. And it's like she can't even talk about her own experiences without being kind of labeled as wrong and irrelevant. It's sad times.
It's frustrating for sure. And I don't know. I've definitely felt that pressure as well, a lot of the time. And I really latch on to what you said before, again, about the good faith, is something that I feel like we just don't have that in each other at the moment.
I think like silencing a range of perspectives and there only being like a party line that everybody must reproduce.
Right.
Actually, that doesn't actually resolve resolve the issues. That's not going to bring about like the change that needs to happen. Like, I feel like if people feel, how do I say this? Like, also like the pendulum swings so wildly from like one thing to another that there'll be a period, and then there'll be a period where there's a party line, and then like 5 years later it's like
someone's like removed, like it's been removed.
And I remember when I started my PhD in like when did I even start it? Like a long time ago. I was looking at the different ways that I try not to use the term mixed race. I totally understand why people use it, but because so much of my work challenges or seeks to continuously disrupt race as like a natural truth, for me to keep using to use a phrase that keeps kind of reinforcing it as something that is maybe biologically true is something that I struggle with. But I totally understand like why people use it, and sometimes I even use it myself as a shortcut. But I find that I kind of I stutter almost when I'm going to say I'm like, so let me just say mixed. So I was looking at what do you call it? Attitudes like in the media, and also just kind of in society more broadly. Sometimes they're expressed through the media, but sometimes they're expressed in other ways about people who are mixed. And when I started my PhD, we were in a congratulatory moment. But I was just like, this is as fucked up as any other moment.
Yeah, of course.
And I do not subscribe to that at all. It's actually dehumanizing. Right. But I was just like, but what happens is the pendulum swings between pathologization and celebratory. Right. They're both totally fucked up. Yeah. But it's usually like one extreme or the other. And within both polarities, there is a dehumanization of the subject. Like, you're not looking, and so even the narratives that are just like, this is the future, you're so beautiful, this is I vehemently reject.
Yeah, it's so like
Yeah, of course. It's
disturbed.
And then there's the pathologization that also often follows the celebratory period. And like and this happens kind of with historic consistency. You can kind of chart it over. So it's interesting as well in terms of like classificate, like racial classification on like the census and things like that. I haven't looked at this for a long time, so this is just off the top of my head. But there was a period where quote unquote mulatto was like on the census in America, and then it actually came off because it was nobody would put it because it became very stigmatized. And then sometimes it's there and it's not stigmatized, and then in other periods it's not there and nobody will like it. And it's got so much to do with what's going on like more broadly in the political climate. But what I find like most fascinating is the fact that sometimes there'll be the addition of these mixed racial categories and it's seen as progress, and then something will change and it will be seen as like, oh, this is horrendous, and nobody will identify with it. It won't be in use, and then the conversation will totally shift, and then things will change as they do, and then a few years later like it will be back again under some other terminology. And I also find the terminology really fascinating as well, how something is, well, I think this is also got to do with phrases like people of color. I think there are so many phrases that now are the phrases that are the labels that are the right ones to use, but in 20 years they will be deemed as offensive, and it will be something else.
It'll be something else.
But I've had conversations recently with people who use it and are like really quite committed to it.
I feel like I'm on Twitter actually too much, so I see what people are saying and what people are upset about.
What are they upset about? I mean, they're upset about everything.
They're upset about everything. Everyone, we're all of color, so it's kind of like it's not enough of a differentiation for them. And again, specifically the use of the word color is like, we can't be saying these things. I don't know.
That's why I'm not interested.
Exactly. I don't encourage anyone to be on it. But anyway. But I stay on it so I can tell Emma what's going on. Tell Emma what the kids are saying.
My gateway into the hellish.
Are you guys on TikTok?
I'm on it, as in like I watch it and I'm in certain pockets, but but I don't.
I'm not really.
Post that.
No, I'm not on it either, so I really don't know.
That's a whole
But I do remember
area.
the period, and we need to move on from this, but I do remember the period where like there was like a whole slew of videos which were basically about whether if you had a black mother, so if you had a black mother, you were a good mixed race person, and if you didn't, you weren't. And so there was like all these videos like basically that was like this.
And on Twitter, the equivalent is how many black grandparents do you have now? So we're like even further away from that. So like if you have a certain number of black grandparents, then you're okay.
Well, the thing is, what I find so interesting is there's actually been like significant amounts of research done on these things, often by black scholars. So people can use these videos as their sources, or they could perhaps read some of the research that's been done, and they could see whether or not the arguments that are being made in these videos actually tally with the research. Because I guess it all just and what's been researched by people who. And let me not even say like white researchers, like there are black researchers as well. So people that have studied and actually dedicated their time, years and effort, and like actually what was I going to say? But actually assess sources rather than just opinions and personal experience.
I mean, these things are just so willfully inflammatory, and they're there to obviously rile people up, and it works. That's the thing. So that's why they continue to do those things.
I just think people need to be when somebody is just like, you need to educate yourself, and then they
Yes.
send me like a YouTube video of like
a talking head.
just a ranting 20-year-old, and I'm like, okay, thank you. I'll
Thanks
put
very
that in my
much.
bibliography. Okay.
I'll save that one to watch for later.
Interrupting this broadcast to let you know that our book, The Half of It, is currently on pre-order, and we would love, love, love for you to get yourself a copy.
The book is about race, identity, and belonging through the lens of the mixed race experience, so you can head to the description box down below or to the show notes, click the link, and grab yourself a copy.
And now, back to the show. I guess we're kind of structuring this a bit like your book, really, but I want to start to talk about some of the things that you posed as like ways forward, like, you know. Nicole, do you want to jump in?
Yeah, I mean, I think something for me that really resonated a lot that I wasn't expecting to hear about was obviously this idea of kind of there was like the spiritual element, which I felt like really touched me, and there was a lot of just kind of like being in community with one another. But I feel like there's or at least the people that I know, I feel like aren't in touch with this kind of side to themselves. Obviously, again, we're talking about social media, we're talking about TikTok. There's a lot of like divine feminine rhetoric that isn't to do with what you talk about in your book, that's kind of been, again, manipulated into this whole other thing about that is actually very binary in terms of like masculine and feminine traits.
And the commodification of like spirituality, where it's being engaged with in like a very superficial and like
totally like in a weird way. And again, it's applied to our dating and like our love lives, which is like that's a whole other area I don't even think I have time to talk about. But I guess the main thing is, how can we connect with people who aren't necessarily like in touch with that spiritual side of themselves? Like, how can we kind of spread that messaging on in terms of, again, like our environments, the environments that we live in, the locality, for example, that you talk about, where it feels like we're very separate and disparate? I guess because I'm so perpetually online as well. Maybe that's part of it.
To this question as well, because I feel like right now, cost of living, dark times, the world is burning.
It's actually like hellish.
It's a hellish
right
state.
now. I this is one of like, it's so bad right now. Like I don't
think I've ever felt like it's really bad until the last few years, but
and particularly the last few weeks.
The last few weeks.
Exactly.
It's a hellish scape, let's be honest. And then there's two things. Like, first of all, I do think, you know, and you obviously touch on this in the book, that kind of spirituality that's not what we deem in the Western world to be conventional is demonized. And so it's hard to connect with it anyway, because first of all, you're like not sure what's safe to connect with and what's
and people think is a bit people think is a bit wishy-washy.
I really related you also to you talking about hippie shite, because that's a phrase that like I would use, and I do consider myself to be spiritual, but like there's definitely times when I'm just like, no, I just have to write that off because it's a bit too woo-woo for me.
I'm actually like very woo-woo.
I love that. But so basically, I guess it's more like, for me, how can we even like rise out of this hellish moment and escape? Not even moment for some people. Like I feel like it's been a dark time for a long time. To try and begin to connect with these things that can bring us forward in the pursuit of a different type of beauty, a different like a reframing of
I think like a reframing of not just beauty, but just like our understanding of ourselves and our relationships with other women specifically. Let me say, you know what, I actually think there's like a real sea change happening, and there's like a vast like thirst for these things. And one of the examples I talk about is in Ireland, how there's this like huge renaissance of like the Irish language, and the Irish and a lot of that is connected. I think like a lot of the energy animating that or like encouraging that is also people like trying to reconnect like to the land and to the relationship like actually like with nature and with the land that was like, you know, kind of so disrupted by colonialism and was also disrupted and
and industrialization and how we think of nature as dangerous and similar to how we think of women.
Those binaries that are like that are imposed and us as like inherently separate to nature and as dominant over it, which is, you know, part of the reason we are in this moment of or in this time of like ecological disaster because of like our attitude to the world rather than seeing ourselves, you know, as an integral part of it, seeing ourselves as like separate and dominant over, and it's something that we can just extract from and exploit and then ultimately like deeply destabilize, and then we will suffer the consequences of that, because if we separate ourselves from it in that way, it is more powerful than us, rather than us understanding, you know, that we should kind of be operating in
Symbiotic.
Like there's a word called entanglement where you're just understood as being, you know, just like utterly like entangled with it all.
Phrase. I was like thinking like I'm in an entanglement.
Oh gosh, it's also a word used in this context. I hadn't actually known that, so I've been using it all the time. And oh my god, okay. I'm dating nature.
Love that.
So in Ireland, there's this like kind of renaissance of the language, and then also with that, there's like a lot of interest in lots of the kind of like pre-Christian like belief system and like the goddesses and lots of the I guess just the kind of stories and knowledge and like wisdom that is located within that. And then I feel like you're also seeing it in this country. There's a real interest in like witches and like paganism and things like that. And I think one of the something that I mention in the book is that like our religious beliefs may be like deinstitutionalizing, but they're not despiritualizing. So I think in the context of Ireland, where you see like the Catholic Church really losing its like grip and power, and then in its place this reawakening and reinterest in like what existed before that, which is something that was actually far more liberatory in many ways. So I think there is a big desire for, and also, you know, so I think there is an interest in these things, and I think people are really like kind of desperately looking for something else.
Yeah, I do think that's true. I feel like even just Oshan, the goddess that you mentioned, she's come up in my life a few times in the last like 6 months or so, and I feel like I've never really like thought, well, that's not true actually. I've read about her before, but she's just not been coming up in this way. So I do feel like there's this like reinvigoration then, and there's this interest. Other people have been bringing her to me. And one thing I did realize though when I read your book is I betrayed myself, because when you described her how she's actually described, I was like, oh no, that's not how I see her. Because you said like, oh, she can't put her arms about her waist.
Woman.
Corpulent woman. And I was like, oh no, hang on, what? And I really, I completely betrayed myself, because I don't know how I imagined Nasha. But there you go. Like that's you know what we do when we're influenced by these kind of Western ideas.
Yeah, absolutely. But I know we're running out of time, but I really want to ask the last question, which is, is this book for men? Do you think this is this kind of interrogation and this kind of, again, kind of breaking down of what these standards have felt like for us as women? Is that still our responsibility to kind of, take on and fix ourselves?
The hellscape. Yeah.
Is it our responsibility?
Yeah.
I mean, I just want to like feel. I just want to feel as free as possible.
Yeah.
And obviously, you are deeply impacted on by the world around you.
Yeah.
And that's not without relevance, of course.
Of course. Yeah.
However, I feel like we also do have more autonomy sometimes than we understand, and we have more power than we utilize.
Right.
So I think this is about kind of trying to like tap into that. And I know for me personally, there are decisions that I can make. So something I talk about in the book is often when I push myself to like make decisions that I feel uncomfortable with, it's from that position. And I don't have to stay with that decision. That's not like predetermining how I'm going to be like going forward indefinitely. But if I put myself in that position, it's from there that I can make like more informed decisions about how I want to be in the world, like what decisions I'm making because I've just been conditioned to make them and I'm just uncritically reproducing them, and what decisions I'm making because no, this is actually like what I want to do. So things like, so I feel like I've done that with like kind of like body hair, my hair. And then recently I gave this like I did a big event, and it was like a public lecture, and like I didn't wear any makeup. And then I spoke about why I had done that and like kind of what that felt like. And I think, for me, I just need to, I don't even know if it's like one size fits all. I think everybody needs to like work out what is helpful for them. I also, we live in a time where it's very much like, I feel like we don't really, people don't really have the tools to like necessarily to think critically. It's more like they're just told what to think. People are like, you need to, this is what's right, and you need to do this, and you need to say this. And I never want to be like that. I never want to be like that in anything that I'm writing or saying. I just want people to like think more expansively.
And then
then critically assess themselves.
Does it stem from discomfort as well? Like, do you think, in terms of this kind of dismantling, like we have to kind of start getting uncomfortable with, like you were saying, maybe decisions you've made in the past came from predetermined things that we were taught, or how we feel like we're supposed to react or think about things?
So discomfort is certainly not like an end goal. And when people are like, oh, we just have to get uncomfortable. Like I'm always like a little bit, that's not that seductive. That's not that compelling. I don't think we're going to create a mass movement.
Exactly.
But I mean, like
that needs a different marketing plan, I think.
But I think because I want to be comfortable in my body and in myself, and because there are so many forces that ensure that women, but not just women, that most of us, but let me just focus on women, are not like, have these insecurities, have these feelings of like, self-loathing, that in order for me to like kind of heal from them, I have to kind of, I mean, in an ideal world, this wouldn't be the case, but given the world is what it is, I feel like sometimes I need to like kind of like push through that to see what happens. And then like, like I stopped shaving, and that was something that was like unimaginable. I couldn't have imagined like being out and like being hairy. And then like I did it, and like the world didn't stop turning on its axis. And it's like, and people were like, oh, we just worried like men won't see you as attractive. And I'm just like, actually, if somebody doesn't see me as attractive, like doesn't see me as attractive because of that, that's not someone I want to find me attractive anyway in the first place. So
It's not about me.
So I feel like discomfort is definitely not the end goal, but because of what we've inherited, sometimes we do have to like sit with discomfort a little bit, but to hopefully like push past and through it, and to feel a greater sense of connectivity with ourselves and just comfort with ourselves. Like I just want to feel okay. No, actually I don't want to just feel okay. I want to feel good.
It is like a coming back to self, for sure. I definitely get that.
I think that the thing that I want to end on is towards the end of the book, and I'm going to paraphrase because I may not get it exactly right, but you said something like, the harshness with which we treat other women is basically just a reflection of the harshness with which we treat ourselves. And I think for me, what I take from it is that idea of like decoupling from competition and like having those conversations, being in conversation, being in community in deeper ways. Like, you know, these things that we have been taught to kind of fight over and disconnect over and be at odds with each other over when it comes to beauty and like colorism and like all of these like things. I think that for me was kind of what I took as I was like, this is a mantra.
Yeah.
For sure. And this is how we can practically move forward. Even us having this conversation right now, those are the difficult things that we can do to kind of, help each other move forward in it.
Like, I feel like I've probably said this in all of my books now, but I really do feel like it's like solidarity is subversive, and it's not to like obscure the different experiences that people have. We need to attend to those and like treat them, you know, acknowledge them and treat them with respect. But also I find it very counterintuitive when somebody with the expresses that they're trying to like support and build up women, but their strategy to do that is to seemingly always be tearing other women down. Seems counterproductive. And I feel like something else that I write about is this idea that things like jealousy and envy and competition, so jealousy and envy are, I guess, like human emotions that will exist under any system, but we live in a system that like rewards, encourages, and actually like demands hyper individualism and competition. So what can we do? And I was always also really interested to look at cultures that rather than encouraged those worst tendencies, tried to mitigate against them. They exist, but rather than, you know, feeding into them, what can we do to try and like mitigate against them? And I really do feel like sorority and solidarity are like very key weapons in that fight.